Hello. The important thing is that I should, first of all, tell you that the place we're going to visit, it's not a museum. It has never been a museum. It is a palace that I have shown you before on one of my English Embankment tours. And by the way, last night we wrapped up these eight chapters of my English Embankment series. It was on one of the, I would say, most recent episodes. The video that I have is actually made up of the three videos. One is the just the walk, well, from the outside and also in the courtyard. That was filmed by Misha. And the two other videos I have from the different tours that I attended also, and also a colleague of mine. This palace um, has always been, well, actually, it was always the big was kind of it's not exactly a hobby club. It's kind of a community center for the all Russian society of the deaf, right? So there's a great deal of the deaf people in Russia, blind, well, visually impaired, audibly impaired, and they all have their communities. They have their community houses, uh, hobby clubs, culture centers. And this palace, ever since the Soviet times, it was their big hub of everything. And it's not just for the city, but it's for the entire country. It was a kind of big headquarters. And this is kind of I would say it's good and it's bad for the palace. So it's bad because it could have become a museum, and thus it could have the palace could have been better preserved for us, because well, you can imagine that since it was not a museum and since the palace didn't really have any heritage status, this up until early 2000, this was not even a listed building, even though it is located on the English Embankment, which is the place where every building originally comes from the 18th century. So nearly every building in the English Embankment has the certain status of federal importance, or at least of the municipal importance, so to speak, kind of the different systems and classifications. Well, so it was not, which means that since it was not a listed building, they could change it the way they wanted. And yes, they did on the one hand. On the other hand, surprisingly, they have been able to also preserve a lot of things. And as you can see from the facade, we're going to take a closer look at the facade. The building looks very different from the buildings around it, right? It doesn't look like a classicism, well, like a mansion, from the classicism period. It doesn't look like many of the palaces on the embankment. And this is so because, yes, as I said, the embankment was developed simultaneously with the city, which is the 18th century, early 18th century, 1700s. And originally, on that very plot of land used to be a house that belonged to Alexander Menshikov, who was the most loyal associate, the most loyal servant and personal assistant and deputy, oh, whatever you say, basically to Peter the Great. He owned lots of land in many areas of the city, so it shouldn't really surprise us. Yeah, Menshikov also owned a big plot of land from across the river, basically opposite this palace, and that's where he built his really huge estate. Nevertheless, that house and that plot of land was sold and purchased so many times that it could have taken, I would say, a separate tour just to and list the number of the names of people and the dates. We don't need to do that. What we need to understand is that the house was rebuilt, and it may look small, but actually it's pretty big because the building goes in the shape of a horseshoe deep into the quarter and actually reaches the neighboring street, which we also have already walked, by the way. And yes, among many interesting personalities and characters, historical characters of St. Petersburg, that owned this plot of land was definitely Grand Duke Mikhail Alexandrovich. He was the last but one resident of this palace before the revolution. So, in fact, he wasn't really kind of kicked out of this palace. His fate is tragic. His life was full of challenges of different kinds, but at least this house was not taken from him. That's important to understand. So, who was Mikhail Alexandrovich? He was the youngest brother to the youngest son of the family of Alexander III and his Danish princess, well, his Danish wife, Maria Fedorovna. Next to Maria Fedorovna, you can see the gentleman with a little mustache just started growing. That's Nikolai. Well, at that point, just Nikolai Alexandrovich, future Nicholas II. And the boy right next, well, the little boy right next to the Tsar is exactly Mikhail. So he was the youngest child, well, the youngest brother, the youngest male child in their family. So he was basically, he was technically the fourth son in the fourth in line to inherit the throne, which was next to impossible. However, well, the life, I would say the history turned out so that he almost became a monarch himself in 1917. And in a way, he did become the monarch until he abdicated, which happened within one and the same day. And for several hours in 1917 and March 1917, it just happened so that the very first Romanov that ruled the country, who was Mikhail I, he, by the way, I don't think I've ever really spoken of him on any of my tours, to be honest. So he was granddad, basically, to Peter the Great, Mikhail I. He was the first Romanov to rule the country, because before that there were Ruriks, or the Rurikins. And another Mikhail Romanov was the last Romanov to ever rule the country. But again, that was only, well, it's exactly how things were. So Nicholas II, just to remind you, in March 1917, after the February Revolution, Nicholas abdicated from the throne. So for himself, right, and also on behalf of his son. And since there were no other male relatives next in kin, so I mean, the next one actually was Mikhail Alexandrovich, but he decided not to take such responsibility. And we will talk about it also a little closer to the end of the tour. So he abdicated, and he was waiting for the mm, for the provisional government and for the Constituent Assembly to come up with a better solution. He thought that he would not be able to rule the country and handle the very stressful situation in the country. So he abdicated from the throne. But yes, here we're looking at the very first and the very last, well, the very last and the very first Romanov, and both of them happen to be Mikhails. That's an interesting coincidence. So who was this boy? Who was this gentleman? Since he was the youngest of the boys, and he wasn't he wasn't even the second one. He wasn't really born. Well, he was born, and his parents knew that this boy was not really meant to become a monarch. So he wasn't really prepared for it, unlike the other children, the other boys. And that's why he didn't even have such ambitions. He grew as a nice boy, quite indecisive, really gullible, not, well, he wasn't really fooling around much. He was he was smart. He was a bit lazy, so studying and having all those private classes was a bit of a torture for him. But he coped with everything. He coped with the workload, with the studies. He could speak freely, and according to some sources, even four European languages. He was very good at horse riding, and actually, horses was a big hobby of his, a big passion of his. And he wasn't the only Romanov that had the same passion. Many Romanovs shared the same passion for horses. And his elder brother, George or Georgy Alexandrovich, he was the second boy in the family. He he loved, absolutely doted his younger brother. However, he mentioned many times that, well, it was for the better that this boy was never really meant to become the next to rule the country, because he wasn't just made for it. Some people are just not made to be monarchs, right? I mean, and that's okay. We just have to come to terms with that. That's it. We just have to face it. I wasn't born to rule the country. He wasn't born to rule the country. So what's the matter? What's wrong? Um, but Georgy Alexandrovich, well, he had all the chances to be the next to rule the country. Um, but unfortunately, he fell ill. He had tuberculosis. It was a very common disease, unfortunately, among the royals, not only in Russia, but the I would say European royals in general. And at that point, they didn't know how to cure tuberculosis. The best thing that doctors could do is just to advise some therapy, and they also suggested moving to a country with a better climate, because, to be honest, St. Petersburg is the one of the worst places for those suffering from tuberculosis or any lung diseases. And even if you don't have any lung diseases, you may develop some if you move to St. Petersburg. Um, yeah. Or maybe not even lung disease, but the story of me, for example, my own story. I never really had any problems with my nose. But once when I moved to St. Petersburg many years ago, the very next winter season, I just caught a minor flu, something, and then it all developed in sinusitis, and yeah, and all the complications. So that wasn't fun. And guess where doctors recommended George to go? To Georgia. And there is a place called Abastumani in Georgia where George built a big palace, his residence, and he stayed there. And there are a lot of photographs, mostly taken from the outside. I'm sure you can recognize the Georgian terrain. This is George visited by Mikhail, his favorite younger brother, his mom, and also the Ksenia, the sister. Here is mom and also Georgy, George. But well, tuberculosis it was. By the way, this is George wearing the traditional Georgian costume. And well, tuberculosis it was incurable, so it was kind of a lethal. But with the proper therapy, well, still they could live a long life, and he still could have become the next to rule the country. He had all chances to do so. But one day he decided to go on a trip on his tricycle, and he had a minor accident. Well, he hurt himself and he died because there was no one around to save him. He had a little fit of cough, and then the accident because of it, and there was no one around to help him. He could have been saved, so he wasn't really at that, I would say, final stage of tuberculosis. So the boy passed away. Well, not the boy, the young man passed away. And by the way, since just yesterday I did a tour of Fabergé Museum, I thought to share with you that in the Metropolitan Museum there is the Fabergé egg called the Caucasus egg, and the Caucasus egg has, Fabergé worked with ivory, and all the smaller images would be painted on the ivory plaques. So here we have four different painting the views of Abastuman, of the Caucasus. It was the visit of the royal family to the manor of George in Abastumani in 1888. Sorry, in and that's that was kind of the egg to remember the trip, that kind of commemorated the trip to the Caucasus of the family. So the young boy, the young gentleman, the young man passed away. He's buried in Abastumani. He's buried there. There was a chapel that was built there on the spot. So that was it. And that was just Nicholas and then Mikhail. Nicholas, unlike George, well, he loved his brother, but he was absolutely against the idea that his younger brother could be the next to rule the country. And plus, Nicholas II, when he already became a father, he obviously, as you know, they couldn't conceive a male child for a long time. But still, he did everything to make sure that Mikhail would not be the next to inherit the throne in case Nicholas would never really produce a male child, a male heir to the throne. So, but in fact, everyone else in the immediate surroundings, people in the court, they loved Mikhail. Mikhail was a nice guy, but very gullible. And at one point, well, the family had had little issues with him. Like once, for example, he fell in love with a lady in waiting to his mother, and the story could have ended really badly because, well, there were rumors that the lady in waiting got pregnant, but those just proved to be rumors eventually. But the love was real there. And since at that point, Mikhail was still seen as a candidate for the next to rule the country, the family just could not let that happen because the possible heir to the throne could not just marry a lady in waiting. So the lady in waiting was sent away outside of St. Petersburg. So was he. He was sent away also for some time. And then he returned and he started, well, every Romanov, as you know, was a chef of, well, the kind of the captain of a certain army regiment. And so was he in Gachina, which is the kind of a outskirts of St. Petersburg. Well, actually, it's kind of a settlement outside of St. Petersburg with the big Gachina palace, was based his regiment. And Mikhail was quite frequent there. And exactly in Gachina, he met Natalia Brasova. Who was Natalia Brasova? Well, Natalia Brasova was, a wife of his camp aide in the regiment, and that was only part of the scandal. She already had, before their romance, Brasova already had a pretty bad, I would say, pretty damaged reputation. Her first husband was Sergei Mamontov, who was related to the big merchant in Moscow. Well, the one who collected impressionists and the story. So she had the money for sure, but that's the only interest that they both shared. Because Natalia Brasova quite quickly felt bored and quite quickly fell in love with someone else. So she had divorced Mamontov and got married for the second time. And that already, the divorce itself was pretty big deal. It was possible. It was okay. It was already end of the 19th century, but still it was not something you would do on a regular basis. I would say not something you would hear of at the regular basis at that point. So, but then, okay, a divorcee marrying again, that was already something quite extraordinary and definitely affected, your position in the society. Nevertheless, so she, by the way, they had the daughter together from the first marriage. So, but she remarried eventually the same year, by the way. She married the the high rank military official, and everything seemed to be working fine. So Vladimir Wolfert was exactly that lucky man, a lucky husband. He was so madly in love with her, with Brasova, that he couldn't care less about what others think about her. And anyway, they spent most of the time in Gatchina, not in St. Petersburg. So technically speaking, um, they didn't show much on big occasions and social. So things were kind of okay. Let's say they weren't really bothered this much about what other people thought about them, especially Brasova. She couldn't care less what others thought about her. Well, and Mikhail happened to be the chief of this regiment in Gachina. And well, in one of the occasions, it was kind of a celebration, and Brasov happened to be at that gathering too. They met, and starting from then, Mikhail would be quite frequent in their home in Gatchina. I would say even more frequent than it should have been. I like this photo of them together. So this is Mikhail. Look at his face. It's like, I'm not here. That's not me. That's not me. I'm not going to hook up with a married woman, especially if she's married to one of the people who serve me in my regiment. Well, that's exactly what happened. So at point they started seeing each other, and that romance was kind of going in front of Wolfert's eyes. So these photographs were taken. All of them were walking together. And I don't know at which point Wolfert actually started noticing things, but uh, things would go this way up until she just confronted her husband and said she wanted a divorce. And she got a divorce. But that was another scandal. So imagine that first story with the lady in waiting was already a challenge for the royal parents and for Nicholas II, I mean, and the Dowager Empress, right? So because by that time Alexander III had already passed away. And they could not let it happen for the second time. A woman of a very low, well, she was not exactly low descent, but she wasn't an aristocrat. She wasn't a princess. She wasn't even a duchess. So no, honestly, that was impossible. And Nicholas II even threatened his his brother, saying that he would take everything away from him. He would deprive him of any inheritance money. He would put a big no, a big ban for him, a big ban for him, and his, I would say, possible uh, mm, kingship even. So all that was looming over the head of the poor Mikhail and Natalia Brasova. But love prevailed. And he knew what he was doing. But at some point, it became known to him and then to Nicholas and his mother that Brasova was pregnant. And the same year, she was expected to give birth to that child. And Mikhail didn't want that child to be born out of marriage. He didn't want the child to be a illegitimate one. And he wanted the child to have his name. Um, and that was something that Nicholas could not swallow, and something that his mother could never swallow. And they thought he was absolutely fooled by Brasova. So she was divorced twice, pregnant from another man, and of a low descent. Like what? I mean, they couldn't go lower than that. Absolutely. How could things go worse than that? So eventually they decided to flee. They decided to flee and they went to Europe. First, she went alone. She decided to take time. She spent several months in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. And then she was joined by him, by Mikhail. Um, well, Mikhail told the family he would be going just to clear his head, to unwind a little bit. But Nicholas and his mom had already they kind of sensed that something was coming, and they contacted every Russian Orthodox church in Europe and made sure that no priest in no church would wed them. Little did they know, little did they know. They were so creative that they well, and probably they knew what their family was capable of. So instead of going to a Russian Orthodox church, they went to a Serbian church in Vienna. And that's when they were able to get married and they stayed in Europe. It didn't happen immediately that they informed Nicholas and the family, but it did happen. So the child, son, was born and was given a name Georgi, and after the late elder brother to Mikhail. So Georgi Mikhailovich would be his patronymic name. And now from then on, the child had a father. The child had at that point the child didn't have a status yet, but at least the child was born not well in a marriage, so that was still important. That still mattered, and obviously they would hope for later on some recognition and some status, well, for inheritance situation. So that's the church. The church is still there, by the way. So in Vienna, the Serbian Orthodox Cathedral of Saint Stephen, Saint Sava. This is the photo that I have been able to find online. I hope that's exactly the church I'm talking about. So Nicholas II went absolutely mad about it. He was absolutely mad, and he entirely uh, broke any connection with his brother. No communication was possible. That was it, and he took away everything that Mikhail had, and also including the financing. But Mikhail, since he was on and off in Europe, and he also went for several months, he was able to take enough money with him. He was able to transfer enough funds from Russia to Europe so that for several years they lived in Europe, renting very expensive real estate, such as a Kenwood house in England. They stayed there for about a year or so. It's just the photos I found online. Nice one, right? So Brasova, I'm pretty sure Brasova enjoyed it. Or Villa Casbec in France. I think it's no, I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure where this is, but somewhere special. This villa, all well, both residences are still around. So and I'm pretty sure that Villa Kazbek is actually one of the peaks, it's one of the mountains in Georgia. And we know that Mikhail loved Georgia because of his late brother. And maybe that's why he chose this villa, because it had some connection with his with his family history. So they also rented Villa Kazbek for several months, but eventually, when the First World War was about to begin, well, obviously, for Russian monarchs staying in Europe, they could have stayed there. They could have stayed there, but Mikhail wrote kind of an open letter to his brother, asking the permission to return, not because he didn't want to stay in Europe, but because he wanted to help his brother, because he wanted to serve the country. And Nikolai allowed him to return. He was sent to the Caucasus. He was sent to be appointed the head of the so-called Wild Division. It was this division was made up of Muslim officers of the Caucasus, and well, they hit it off immediately. They got on well. They loved their chief. Um, they doted him. They almost worshipped him. This is how, I don't know. It's just the bond that they had. However, Natalia Brasova didn't like her position very much. So while most of the time Mikhail was away at war, well, elsewhere, she was visited frequently by this Grand Duke, who you may have recognized by now, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, one of the plotters, that who killed Rasputin, and he started seeing her way too often until it became known to Mikhail that actually they started seeing each other for a while. We don't know exactly how long the whole thing lasted, but yeah, okay, they started seeing each other. And she told openly about that eventually. So she confessed in one of the letters. So he was at war. The first war was in full swing. And she told him about that little affair because she felt forgotten, because she felt bored, and her husband was not with her. How sweet, right? So, and then what you're looking at is the text of the manifesto on the abdication of Nicholas II. So you know all the story of the. I've spoken so much about it. It's not a tour about the revolution history. So, but what we need to know is that on the 2nd of March 1917, Nicholas II had abdicated from the throne for himself and also on behalf of his younger son, and that was it. That happened, by the way. The abdication happened in the train. Um, not too far from St. Petersburg, and this news that Mikhail was the next to rule the country, like automatically found him on the Millionaire Street in this very building. That's where he was staying because his wife stayed in Gatchina, and his wife stayed and kept on seeing Dmitry Pavlovich. Uh, um, at least at that point, or allegedly they were still seeing each other. I'm not entirely sure about the chronology, who broke up with whom at which point. So we don't know that. But what we know is that she, let's say, she could not be seen Dmitry Pavlovich at that point because Dmitry Pavlovich had already been sent away for the murder of Rasputin. So, but she kept on staying. She stayed in Gatchina. She had a literature. She had a salon, not the literature, but she had a salon, and she basically threw parties every day and flushed down the money that her husband had. And then, so when this news reached Mikhail, he it took him several hours to decide whether I mean, he had already been appointed anyway, automatically. But then he could say no, obviously. He could have abdicated. He could abdicate, and that's what eventually he did. One of the reasons for it was that the provisional government could not really provide the security, could not really guarantee the stability and the safety for him, for his family, and for his children. And after the revolution, thank you, Grisha. And after the revolution, he was sent to Perm, the town in the Urals, and he was one of the first Romanovs to be killed. By the way, he stayed in the hotel. This is the hotel in Perm. One day, he and his very loyal servant, an Englishman, his servant was British, so they were taken from the hotel, and not even sure where they were taken. So they were taken somewhere in the countryside where they both were shot to death and buried. And there is still no understanding where the grave is. And well, the Natalia Brasova eventually managed to escape from Russia, and she and her daughter from the first marriage and her son from Mikhail, they lived in Paris. She inherited a lot of money after the death of Mikhail, and with that money, she bought a car for her son. Her son loved cars, loved racing, and Georgy died in a car crash in that very car that he bought with inheritance money from his late father. So eventually, it was just Natalia Brasova and her daughter from the first marriage. That was it. So she died in a facility for the poor. She died from cancer, and she was in her 60s, in drenching poverty. She's buried in France, and that was it. So, but the palace we're going to visit tonight, it was briefly their home before the Grand Duke would be taken to the war, and before Natalia Brasova decided to go to Gachina, but she would be kind of going back and forth on her shuttle, Gachina, St. Petersburg, Gachina, St. Petersburg. But eventually she remained at Gachina, and from Gachina she was able to escape. As I said, this palace is not really a museum, so don't expect to see big interiors or gorgeous rooms. Well, there are gorgeous rooms, but it's not, something that you would call a palace in St. Petersburg. It is a palace, but there are so many opulent palaces in an impeccable condition that this is clearly not the case. But it is a memorial place with a lot of original details that still have survived, which is quite incredible. I really like this archway where we are already in the courtyard. And there is another courtyard, kind of a hidden one. You don't see it from there, but once you enter, and if you know where to look for, there will be another archway. Yes, to another secret courtyard. So as you can see, the area is pretty big. There are a lot of service buildings. This is the second courtyard. And as you can see, there's not really much going on there. It hasn't really been taken care of for a long time. So there are two videos. One of them I filmed during like winter time, mid-season, I don't remember. And there's also a summertime video filmed by one of my colleagues. So as you enter from the English Embankment, you find yourself immediately, and that I remember the smell. That's clearly an old building. It doesn't smell like a museum. It smells like a research facility. It smells like a bit of the Soviet smell. I don't know how to explain that. I'm sure you have no idea what I'm talking about, but you know that there are certain smells that have, a certain association in you. You certain institutions, certain places, and well, that smell in a certain way. We see ourselves at the main staircase and also in the lobby, kind of. And the lamp is original, and the details and the decorations of the wall on the walls are original as well. The staircase itself, built in white marble, is original. As I said, in 1916, the house was would be rented by the Spanish embassy. This embankment, as you know, had a lot of embassies and different international presence of different kind. So these are the photos taken in the Spanish embassy, 1916. So we can see the same staircase. We can see, I would say, pretty much similar designs anyway. And luckily, the photos were taken um, way before the revolution. It was taken like in early 1916, and that's basically shortly after the embassy moved in, and we may even think, again, at least we can assume that the interiors looked exactly like they looked during the times of the Grand Duke there. This chandelier here is also original, and the paintings on the wall, however, are not. The rest, the caryatids, the atlases, they are original. They have always been here, and this is the design that was made to commission of the Grand Duke himself. the, the paintings are from the Soviet period, and we have no idea, unfortunately, what was there before the Soviets decided to take over this free space. And there must have been something. Could have been some mythology, could have been some battle scene. We don't know, but we never will. And imagine that to me, this is a beautiful staircase, a very expensive one, quite unusual shape, by the way. Yeah, the glass ceiling, the glass, the ceiling decoration, all that next to the Soviet, clearly Soviet themed paintings. It looks a little bit odd, like what can I say? But it is what it is. And this was just the main staircase for the deaf community. And also from time to time, the palace opened its doors for visitors, for different concerts. And during the Soviet times, things were doing okay. Things were going okay for the facility. But in the recent times, the funding was not enough, obviously, and the facility started renting out spaces. I don't know how they did that, like how they were given permission to that, but one of my colleagues, Roma Vizenian, rented an office, and this is how in this palace, and this is how for the first time I was able to visit it. And I'm using a little bit of my old videos so that they were filmed without a gimbal. It was pretty dark, shaky, but yes. And before that, again, no tours were ever possible. So sometimes you could visit a concert. Yeah, that was possible, but you wouldn't be shown upstairs. You wouldn't be taken to this room with the fireplace drawing room. No, this was that was out of question. But with the influx of interest towards the Romanov, so around let's say, and also around the times of the anniversary of the revolution, right, in 2017. It was decided, or somehow the administration of this facility allowed the guided tours. So I attended a guided tour done by my colleague, and and this is when the people, I would say the audience, actually found out of the story of Mikhail and Natalia Brasova. Well, the palace has the amazing view overlooking the Neva River, overlooking. So the Aurora cruiser was docked right next to the windows, right under the windows of the palace. And who would have thought that the Grand Duke Mikhail, when looking out from the window, he actually saw the ship that would give the signal to start the storm of the Winter Palace and the storm of the current government. That was something quite extraordinary, I would say. This is where it was docked. You see that these piers are, well, they are temporary, but they're kind of not temporary. They are just, there are always some ships docked there during the navigation season. Always. There is a library, and the bookcases are original. It's just that the community, the deaf center, I don't even know what to call this. I should have checked, but it kind of slipped my mind. But they use the bookcases from the Grand Duke. So it stayed with the embassy. Again, it's not like that Mikhail went to Perm and the Soviets moved in here. No, it wasn't like that. By the way, we're looking at the bay window here, and in this bay window there is this semicircular sofa. So as I was told, the upholstery, well, the leather is new, but the sofa itself, at least the shape of it, like the skeleton, not the cushions, but the skeleton itself is original. So it's easy to imagine Mikhail sitting in that sofa, watching the Neva, watching the ships go by. I can easily picture that. And then this is the corridor that takes you to kind of the women's section of the palace. But in that part of the palace, there was nothing, not really much left. Mostly rooms of the administration and some classes. So I was never really let there, so I don't know how much is going on there. But after the tours were allowed, the administration started to, well, just decided to share a little history of the palace. And here you see portraits of a lot of people from the previous period. So a lot of people owned this palace. They were people related to the royals. There was Alexander Pushkin, who, well, I'm sure you can see his portrait in the lower left-hand corner. So Pushkin also visited this palace because he stayed in a building, well, just like a 2 minutes walk from here. So this place was always, I would say, popular spot on the map. And the Natalia Brasova also pursued those interests to become one of the um, hosts of one of the most popular salons in the city. And she kind of succeeded, but for a short period of time. When they returned, when the First World War started and they returned, there wasn't really, well, their story, their marriage was not really a big issue anymore. I think that's just simply because that the situation changed and the priorities kind of shifted too. I think that was the story. The fireplace is original. The mirrors are original, and well, the fireplace is no longer functioning. That's why they covered it with a shield or something. But the floor is original. You see, uh, that's amazing. Yes, you don't really find, other than the bookcases, you don't really find the furniture or any memorial items associated with the Grand Duke. But the fireplace itself, I think, looks absolutely extraordinary. Uh, there are a lot of decorations still there. Well, yeah, okay. This room looks kind of strange. This is a concert hall, but originally it was a dancing room. Big dance hall, which was actually longer than that, but it was decided to, well, they decided to give it a stage. They built a stage, and because of this stage, the room itself looks really awkward. Like there's something was really, really wrong with the planning, but the stage was not meant to be there, and it looked way more, I would say, smoothly. It worked way better without the stage, but that's what was needed in the Soviet times because they could, right? Because the building was not listed, and they could do whatever they wanted with it. But originally, yes, and I think that the cheers is also an artifact, but from the Soviet times. So the cheers are exactly the cheers that you could find at every research facility, at every local community center, at every local concert hall. You could see the same cheers. So I believe that the cheers themselves are already an artifact and can become museum exhibits. So you see this, I filmed it. I'm not even sure how long ago. I think it was 2021 when I filmed it. I'm not sure. So that you can see the quality. Plus, it was very, very dark. And maybe it's one of my favorite parts that the The next another entrance, not the gala entrance, but another entrance um, is there. The door is there. The uh, This is the black letter, so this is the letter used for the service. You can immediately recognize it. There's no mm, any decoration there, and also also um, so the glass, right? The glass and the doors survived like everything. This is absolutely amazing thing that all the pieces of glass that you find in these doors, they survived. They survived the First World War. Okay, First World War, they weren't really putting bombings in the city, but it survived the revolution. It survived the Second World War times. It survived the years of well, not neglect. It's not really the right thing to say, right? But the times when the building was not really treated in the way it should be, and a couple more photographs of from the times from the British Spanish embassy. Well, that's actually this is what the concert hall looked like during the times of the embassy. Let me stop here for a second. You see the columns. You see the Britons. Maybe I'm not entirely sure what those sculptures are holding the ceiling. So, but during the times of the embassy, it was. I'm not sure what this is. Is it a dining room? I'm not sure. So, but that's the room. At least we can see that it looked a lot better than than nowadays, because that stage really should not be there at all. But well, you get the story. And also a little bit of the interiors, but again, it's hard to say whether this has already been changed uh, by the ambassador in 1916. Okay, so this has been it. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm open in the chat. So as I told you, so I hope you're not disappointed too much by it. It's not a museum, it was never a museum, and I'm so happy that I was able to visit it at some point. I was able even to film little videos, and then we put everything together because the this summer, um, well, this September, maybe October, I'm not sure. They were going to close well, it was supposed to close for restoration. So I have no idea if it has happened, if the restoration has started, and if it does, well, I hope it will. I hope it has started. It's gonna take years, and yeah, I definitely can't wait to see what it's going to look like after the restoration. But I know that it could take really long time, and I'm glad I was able to jump on this and tell you the story of the Romanov, which is not very often shared. But so he could have become next to rule the country, and he could have saved the monarchy. He was heavily criticized by it by Nicholas. Nicholas didn't expect that. He he was appalled upon learning the truth that his brother had abdicated, because for Nicholas and his wife Alexandra, they saw it as their, well, it was their like duty in life. They were absolutely sure they were anointed, so to speak, by God to rule this country. They thought it was the divine uh, task for them, so to speak. So that's why they considered it a big disgrace that Mikhail had abdicated, and yeah. So a lot of disappointment for Nicholas. What can I say? Okay, so oh, thank you, Cynthia. I'm glad you enjoyed the history lesson and the short visit to the palace. This is, well, this palace, just so you would know, is very difficult to access. Very. I first was able to access it because my colleague rented an office there, but the administration didn't really allow, for a long time, didn't really allow tourists. But then when the financial situation got really difficult, I think they just gave in and said, okay, bring them on. And this is when, for a short period of time, like really about a year or two, the tours were allowed there. So, and this is a really A rare visit. Yes. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you, Ashrid. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. So, exactly in 30 minutes from now, thank you, Ruth. I'm taking you to the Temple Mount. We're going to be talking, we're going to see the place where I would say most likely Pentecost happened. We're going to explore a little bit also the area around the Dome of the Rock. We'll try to locate the sections of the temple on the dome, well, around the Dome of the Rock. And yeah, so basically we're going to be talking about the important events that happened on the Temple Mount for Jews and for Christians. And well, Christmas is, well, I would say really the right time to talk about it. Ellen, well, Hanukkah was also a week ago. That was also all about the temple anyway. So I think this is very, really, really timely. And probably next week. Oh yeah, that staircase was really beautiful. I loved it. So the way it curved, yeah, it's pretty unusual. I liked it too. I liked the staircase very much. I was sure I had a selfie on the staircase, but I couldn't find it. So I have about 30,000 photographs on my Facebook, and like 27,000 of these photographs are basically museums of Russia. And imagine how many photographs I have on my phone, on my Google Drive. Yeah, this is like a lot. Honestly, I have a lot of them. And I have videos. They're not of a good quality because I filmed it several years ago, but I have them, and some of them are very rare. But renovations or not, but the twists and turns of history are a value themselves. Absolutely. And just in case, the last episode for the Temple Mount is also already on my website next Sunday. We're going to explore the Temple Mount once again and also the area around it. And then we'll see how it goes. So next year, after Kenwood is beautiful. So I'm not sure. Is it open for visits, or you can just basically rent it and stay there for the weekend? I'm not sure how it works. You have been there often. Okay, interesting. I'm joking. Of course, I'm joking there. Wow, yeah. So now you know that it also is related to the Romanovs. Who would have thought? Yeah, can with the mixer, exactly. Exactly. It's open to public, free Android. Oh, how lovely. Okay, I had no idea. Wow. Is you cannot stay there. Oh, what a shame. I was just about to. Bummer. Mm. Anyway, darling, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah, that's very close to Hampstead. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. So, as you know, on my website, you can find a lot more links. Also, on my YouTube channel, you can already check out the two recordings of the of my visits to the New Year markets and to the New Year garden. I would appreciate your support. You know, it can be PayPal donation. You can buy me a coffee. And don't forget, in 30 minutes, we meet at the Temple Mount. And also on Tuesday, the last tour of the year, the home concert with my husband, with my son. Yeah, and maybe and some salads, Russian salads, and well, the salad that you can also find here in Georgia. So, I mean, we share the common past anyway, and some traditions they survive. And yeah, and holidays, yes, Dolly, exactly. The meat jelly will definitely be there. I promise. Misha, we need to buy the holidays. Dolly needs to see the holidays of the concert tour. Be ready, everyone. I warned you, okay? There's going to be meat jelly. I know, Dolly. Nobody should eat it, but it's delicious. But nobody should eat it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, honestly. An engagement present in 1978. Sorry, Sharon, a Kenwood mixer, an engagement present in 1978. Was it a posh thing to get? in 1978. I don't know what I would think about the engagement, a mixer for an engagement. I don't know. Um, Maybe I could go with that too. Who knows? Hard to say. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I will see you soon in Jerusalem. Oh, okay. I got it, Sharon. Good. That is good. Great. Bye bye, everyone. I'll see you soon. Thanks for everything and thanks for joining. Bye bye.